Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It's part 2 of the October Q&A, which is comfortably inside October this time because, as we mentioned in part 1, we're going to have to squeeze in quite a few releases and stuff to be covered in the next little bit. So Q&A is a bit earlier than usual, but still plenty of great questions. Check out part 1 if you want to see the other half of the questions that we answered on the YouTube community tab. There'll be a part 3 as well for our Patreon members. And yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into answering some questions.
Let's do it.
I've got one for you here, Steve, and this has been hotly debated. We've had a few comments asked our way about this one. Is the RTX 3090 an RTX 2080 Ti replacement, or as Nvidia claims, is it more of a Titan class?
Well, it's not really a Titan class product because it doesn't have the Titan level of support that we've typically seen in the past. So things like NGX, it doesn't have access to that. It doesn't have pro-level certified drivers. So it's not a true Titan class product, but it does have the bigger VRAM buffer. Whether it's a Titan class VRAM buffer for this generation, well, you know, that's something you can debate, I suppose. But it does have significantly more VRAM than the 3080. But you could argue that the 3090 should have had that much anyway. So it's definitely a 2080 Ti replacement. And I guess these questions sort of come about because people are sort of wondering, why does it exist? What's the point of it? Why is it so expensive? You know,
yep,
all that kind of stuff. And I guess I'll read a tweet that I published this tweet quite a few weeks ago now, but a lot of people were talking about the 3090, and I had this to say. Seems like a lot of people agreed, but I'll read it out to you. I said, I think we need to acknowledge that the gaming landscape has changed. 10 years ago, PC gamers were predominantly thought to be nerds gaming in a basement. Today, it's very much a mainstream activity, and with a much larger audience, you get many more people with deep pockets who just want the best, and reviewers have no say in that. Nvidia knows full well that these people exist, and that they are more than happy to be price gouged, and therefore the 3090 exists. For everyone else, may I introduce the RTX 3080, 3070, and so on. And so I made that tweet. I didn't run it by Tim or anything. And do you agree with that, Tim?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's been a lot of, I don't know, like blame shifted on various groups of people as to these pricing situations, whether it's blaming reviewers or blaming users but I think at the end of the day, it's just the market kind of just dictates what people are willing to pay. The market showed with the 2080 Ti that even though it's a poor value product in comparison to everything else on the market, that people are willing to pay a level of money for the best. So the 3090 is really taking advantage of that in that it's
100%.
More expensive than the 2080 Ti and provides even less of a benefit compared to the card directly below it.
Yep.
But at the same time, I think what really matters in this discussion is what is the card below it and how do they stack up? What's the lineup looking like? If the 3090 is like 50% faster and it costs 100% more than the next best card, then it's like, okay, it's not a great looking product. That maybe, you know, they're trying to price gouge, but they also have a much faster card. But I think if they're offering a card that's just a little bit slower for a lot less, and that's, you know, a good value product, then can you really complain all that much about the 3090 being a really expensive card? I mean, for most people, you can get 90% of its performance for less than half the price, when you can find one on sale, of course. So, yeah, I totally agree. I think the 3090 is that product for people that, you know, have 20 Lamborghinis in their garage or, you know, massive mansions where you always pay for the best. You just, whatever it costs, it doesn't matter. You just want the best. Whereas the mainstream card, you want that card, the next down in the tier list, I guess, to be a really compelling card. And then the top thing can be whatever it wants to be.
It's basically, as we called it in our review, it's a completely pointless graphics card that doesn't need to exist. And if you're a gamer, you definitely shouldn't buy it. But if you want to say that you have the biggest and the best, then that's what it exists for. I mean, you can't... Nvidia's a company. They make products to make money. And if they know there's people that are going to pay stupid amounts of money for a stupid product, they're going to make stupid product. And it's exactly as I said in my tweet. That's why it exists. Everyone else should buy the 3080. The 3070 is probably going to be pretty good value. Of course, we'll have to wait and see what AMD does, and these are all things that we've again said in our day one reviews. But that's it. So, but yeah, the question whether it's a Titan class sort of card, obviously Jensen was using that as a sales pitch and to try and, get it over the line with reviewers and stuff, and maybe some reviewers bought that. We don't really review GPUs for professionals, which is what I said in my review. Basically, I said, if you've got a workload, like a Blender type workload that can take advantage of the extra VRAM, then maybe the card is, good value for you. It is one of the cheapest ways to get that much VRAM. But if you're a gamer, it makes absolutely no sense. You definitely shouldn't buy it. So that's that one really, in a nutshell.
Yeah, they're really straddling that line, aren't they? They want to do the expensive card for the people that have loads of cash, but it doesn't seem like with this product they want it to be a Titan either. Like it almost seems like they have a Titan that they're going to release that gives you those pro level features, or maybe they're just restricting those to they're not Quadro cards anymore because they canned that brand, but the professional tier cards. Mm-hmm. It's kind of,
it's clearly, I mean, it's a 2080 Ti replacement. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
They just tried to make it seem a bit more special because the 3080 was just so much cheaper. But when comparing these cards, it's really about price normalization. So comparing similar prices across the brands. And obviously the 3090 and the 2080 Ti have a similar price. And a lot of people have said to us, you can't compare the 3080 to the 2080. You've really got to compare it to the 2080 Ti. I'm not really sure what they're basing that on, whether it's performance or what, but it's priced to match the 2080, which was the 1080 Ti. Anyway, all of this is in our review, so
yeah,
we've been pretty clear on this from day one. So I guess we'll move on to the next question. All right, next question here. What do you do in your spare time besides play games? Spare time? What is this spare time he speaks of, Tim?
I'm not really familiar with this. Is this like that fabled, well, it's called a holiday or something, is it? It's like where you don't work on that day, or I'm not really familiar with it though. You'll have to let us know in the comments what this
too many conspiracy theories and speculations.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. But in all seriousness, well, I have a family, so I spend time with them generally when I'm not on the computer or playing games. But I also enjoy lots of other things. I enjoy fishing, which I don't do for most of the year because of where I live. The weather's pretty terrible. But I also enjoy playing around with power tools and building things and doing all that kind of stuff as well. So, yeah, a few different things there. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, when I get that spare time, I don't have a family, so I don't have to dedicate any time to any of that rubbish. So it's, it's mostly, I really like watching sport. So I spend a lot of time watching AFL and cricket and that stuff, depending on what the season is, and getting involved with discussions on that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a grand final coming up soon this weekend, probably when this video goes live. So I'll be all over that. And then, yeah, you were seeing like the Lego collections in the background, stuff like that's usually what I get into. And yeah, just having fun. You know how it is. If there's any spare time, you just gotta make the most of it these days.
I hope your mum doesn't watch the Q&As. She'll have broken her heart with that family rubbish.
All right, hi. Monitors and phone displays these days are above 60 hertz, so why don't we see 90/120 FPS videos on YouTube or other places for that smooth experience? Surely 1080p 90 FPS would be easier to make than, say, 4K or 8K videos, which are on YouTube. Linus Tech Tips have every video 4K and some 8K too. Yeah, I mean, we do 4K videos as well. There is a benefit going from like 30 to 60 FPS for especially things like B-roll and the smoothness. I eventually converted over to 60 FPS after a while.
We got him.
But 120 FPS, I mean, I think for if you're doing gameplay recordings, I think there could be a lot of benefit from, if you're playing at 120 FPS, to have that video streaming or replay being available at 120 FPS, because you get that feel. But if it's just us sitting and talking or showing some B-roll, like 60 FPS gives you that smoothness, so you're not getting the motion shutter. But would it be worlds better, certainly, to justify like double the bandwidth, double the processing, double the storage to do 120 FPS? I'm not sure it would be, at least at the moment, when a lot of that stuff is still at a premium. Like, for our workflow, doubling the time it takes to render a video is probably not worth it right now. In the future, maybe it would make sense when a lot of that stuff's easier and storage isn't as much of an issue, processing power isn't as much of an issue. But right now, I think doing 4K 60 makes a lot more sense than doing 1080p 90, as you suggest.
Yeah, for sure. Will the RX 3000 series be available before Christmas 2021? Well, I hope it is before then. I don't think it'll be before Christmas 2020. But yeah, Jensen seems to think that early 2021 they will have availability of their RX 3000 series of graphics cards, but I don't know. So far, it's not looking good, so we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I think this next question is kind of a flow on to what you were just talking about. Let's face it, the RTX 3000 series launch has been a disaster. Do you remember any such disastrous product launches in the past? I'd say it's probably not the first time that we've had horrible availability for GPUs last for some time. We've seen a few AMD GPUs in the past around the mining craze that have sort of, well, it wasn't necessarily AMD's fault, but you couldn't buy like a Vega 56 for ages. That's right.
Yep.
RX 480, I think as well, one of the cards, whether it was the 4 gig model, potentially the better value card, wasn't available for ages. So in that sense, yeah, we've had this sort of thing in the past. Turing's launch was perhaps a disaster for different reasons, but this one in particular, I think, is gaining a lot of angst. The Vega 56 was it was a product that some people were interested in and people were keen on buying it, but I think the demand for this series is way beyond a Vega or a Turing, and I think that's really contributing to it being potentially more disastrous than it would be if it was, like a 10900K that no one cares about, because that processor isn't really available at this point. It's been how long has it been since that CPU launched? But people don't really care about it. So
there's also alternatives as well. It's sort of like the Ryzen 3 3300X as well. While that is a great value CPU at that price, you can't get it, so people have probably just gone for like the Ryzen 5 3600, which they're not wrapped about, but it is a better CPU and probably a better buy in the long run. Whereas with like the RTX 3080, there's sort of no alternative really.
Yeah, that's right. That impacts it a lot.
Yeah, and it's more of a gaming focused bit of hardware, which, gamers being the reasonable bunch of people that they are, don't take too kindly to not being able to buy something they want to buy. But I think the question is worded quite well. I think it is steadily approaching sort of disaster sort of status, really, if this goes on for much longer. Do you think that Nvidia will be, in fact, switching to TSMC's 7nm node for their Super/Ti variants, as the rumours suggest? Ooh, a rumour question, Tim. What do you reckon?
Got no idea on this one. No idea. I think that, there's obviously pros and cons for each approach, isn't there? In the past, we saw the Super products were sort of slightly higher clocked, and then they unlocked a few more CUDA cores in the design to give that performance benefit. And that's kind of the easy way, isn't it, of doing it? Like, you're on the same node, so there's no re-architecting you need to do.
I was going to say, how much work is it for them?
Yeah, so I think
those things are usually sort of a refresh, and going to TSMC's 7nm node, that seems like a lot more than just a simple refresh.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, Ampere, they've already got it working on TSMC 7nm for the really high-end data center stuff. So that massive die they're making, which costs tens of thousands of dollars, is a 7nm part already. So that's probably simplifies it a little bit, but again, like you say, there's kind of pros and cons, isn't there? They can go the simple route or go the hard route, and maybe it's going to depend on the competition. If AMD's doing great things on 7nm, then maybe Nvidia will feel the need to, maybe speed up the transition to 7nm. But if there's an easier way to go, like Turing's Super refresh, there wasn't much competition for a lot of those parts, so it's super easy refresh, put virtually no effort into it, and you get, more sales. So yeah, I think it's really going to come down to that. But I think they can't wait too long to go into 7nm, because then it'll be superseded by 7nm plus 5nm. So if they're going to do it at some point, it's going to have to happen reasonably soon. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
All right, next question here. Hey, do you think AMD will come up with a new socket next year? Asking because I have a B450 motherboard, and upgrading to a B550 motherboard, or he says 500 series motherboard, really, seems worthless if it's the end of the line. Well, this is sort of what my video recently talked about focusing on B450 and B550 motherboards, we're pretty confident that there will be a different socket that will be incompatible coming out for Zen 4. Yeah, I don't know. Is there any actual official information about that yet? I don't think there is.
I don't think there's anything official. I think they're keeping their options open. So it sounds like, you know, I mean, I'm sure that at this point the CPU is actually locked in. So they probably do know at this point. But it's at this stage, that option is open. They might go one or the other way.
Well, we're working under the assumption that it's the end of the road and that there'll be no more compatibility and they'll be ending that. And that seems extremely likely to me anyway. So unless there's something unless your B450 motherboard doesn't have something you need and it can't easily be added in, then that would be the only reason that you would buy a B550 board if there was extra things you needed, which is basically what I said in my video. But it would be probably the way to go. Just hold on to your B450 board really at this point and wait and see what happens next year, and work from there.
According to some spec sheet I chanced across, PCIe connectors are only rated for 50 insertion cycles. In your work benchmarking dozens of games and GPUs, I'm sure you've blown through that specification on many parts. Have you ever worn out a PCIe connector, and if so, what did you do about it?
So are we talking PCIe slots or the connectors on the graphics cards?
I think probably it's a good question. Maybe
well,
both.
I'll talk about both.
Yeah.
Let's address both. So I have killed a PCIe x16 slot on a Z390 motherboard, which was one of our older GPU test systems. The solution to fixing that was just to put a new motherboard in because I haven't got time to try and fix it and don't care. It was, I've got plenty of motherboards. We're talking easily over 1,000 graphics card installs.
50 seems pretty low. Like that would
I'll
be
do
a
50 in one video.
Thing, yeah.
Yeah, like I would do 50 in one video. Like a game, Horizon Zero Dawn GPU benchmark video, I would have done easy over 50 just to make that video, even if you're only testing, I think I might have tested close to 50 cards. So it was somewhere between 30 and 50, but a lot of cards I reseat multiple times and retest just to confirm results. But the motherboard I killed would have been well over 1,000. I couldn't guess as to how many, I just know it was well over 1,000. And it eventually died. It physically looked okay, so I'm not sure whether maybe one of the pins snapped off at the base or something and it still looked like it was seated correctly because there was no obvious damage. But anyway, stuck a new one in and fine. As for graphics cards, slotting them in and out, I've never killed one. And stuff like, our 2080 Ti, for example, that would have been put in and out of slots. Again, no idea how many times, but significantly more times than you ever need to worry about, basically.
Yeah, I'd be surprised I'm not questioning whether they've been rated for 50, but I'd be very surprised if that was the average amount of insertions.
It's just a conservative. It's a conservative rating based on the fact that people do it twice.
Yeah, you're talking about a slot that has to hold some form of a 1.5 kilo GPU, and you're saying that it's so fragile that it'll break after 50 insertions. I'm sure it's rated for 50, but I would expect it to, as you say, last for thousands of cycles. Yeah. Some of the boards these days have pretty reinforced primary or even multiple PCIe 16 times slots on there. So yeah, the fact you've only killed one is pretty impressive, really. Yeah,
it's probably more the sort of elastic tensile strength of the pins that get pushed back and forth. They're only moving very slightly. They probably don't even break. They just get to the point where the elastic effect is no longer a thing and they just stay back and don't push it on the...
That little tab, I've broken that tab even on purpose off a few times.
You mean the retention clip?
Yeah, that little clip.
That's the first thing. I get a pair of pliers and remove that the second. As soon as a board is deemed a GPU test board, that comes straight off because that is a nightmare having to flip that thing back. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Right. So, do you think Zen 3 CPUs will have a reasonable stock on launch, or will it be a Q1 2021 before most people can get one? Okay, so who knows? Anything's possible. It's 2020. Anything is possible. But in sort of unofficial talks with sort of companies involved in this, they seem to think that Zen 3 availability won't be a problem. And if anything, it won't be unusual where there may be, depending on demand, people flock to them, but they'll be able to resupply and restock quite rapidly to meet that demand. So we're certainly not expecting an RTX 3080 situation with the Zen 3 CPUs. And there's also a lot of CPUs to pick from, which helps as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a combination of factors. Launching the 4 CPUs at once is going to take pressure off any one part being in particularly high demand. It's also not on a new node. It's the exact same 7nm node that AMD's been using for existing Zen 2 parts. So if they're taking some chunk of their Zen 2 manufacturing capacity and putting that towards Zen 3, then they should have a lot of capacity available for that sort of part on that node. And it's a mature node, so we shouldn't be seeing a situation where they're trying to bin the living crap out of these parts to get usable products. They're working with a very mature product. So all of those things are going to work in their favor, unlike with, say, an Ampere product where dies are larger. They've launched 1 or 2 products at a time. It's a new node, so there's going to be complications with that. And all those sorts of things completely change the situation. So I'm not saying there will be amazing Zen 3 availability, but there's a lot of things that are going right for them. Even stuff like the I/O die being exactly the same helps them significantly in terms of getting this supply out. And, they're not relying on, you're not relying on an EVGA or a Gigabyte to design part of that CPU for you. It's just them making the one part. Whereas board partners have to get specs in and design and start building these products. And it's just so much more complicated on the GPU side. So,
okay, next question here. With the recent leaks pointing towards 2.1 plus gigahertz clock speeds for the AMD Radeon 6000 GPUs, how important are clock speeds when compared to fundamental GPU architecture? Well, I guess we could use something like AMD's FX series, although that's not a GPU, it is an architecture of types. And clock speed, not that important. You obviously need a really powerful, efficient architecture. So it really is all about the architecture. Of course, that architecture also has to scale well to clock speed. So it is a balancing act of those two things. But I'd say the architecture is probably the most important thing of the two. And then if it clocks well, that's a bonus.
Yep.
Is that pretty much that question?
I think it's one of the situations where you always want more frequency. Like it's never, oh no, it's running 2.5 gigahertz. I only wanted 2 gigahertz. Whereas sometimes, if you add more cores, it can give you like more CUDA cores or more stream processors. It can give you no benefit in some situations. So frequency tends to be like a safer bet for getting more performance than some architectural gains.
Sure. It's also, as we've sort of seen with Ampere and then to cross back over to CPUs, we've seen this with the Ryzen versus, Intel 8th, 9th, 10th gen, all that sort of stuff, that when you're, let's say in the case of the GPUs, gaming at a lower resolution where all those extra cores or architectural features can't necessarily be fully utilized, the extra clock speed can be very beneficial there. So I'm expecting, especially compared to Ampere, I'm expecting AMD to have quite an advantage, sort of assuming that they're similar at 4K, quite a big advantage at maybe like 1080p, where you can't utilize all those extra cores of something like a 3080. But anyway, we'll have to see. It'll make for a very interesting comparison anyway. I don't expect the scaling to be anywhere near even across the various resolutions that we test at. Yeah,
the architectures are getting very different between the two brands. They used to be much more similar. Now they're just all over the place with different features. Ray tracing, another area where there'll be big architectural differences that could mean big performance differences. So we'll have to see where that one goes.
Okay, a bit of an interesting question here. I'll read this one out. Say the rumors that Nvidia will suddenly find a bunch of 3080s and 3070s at the launch of Big Navi. So say that is true, do you think they'll suffer any kind of blowback for playing games with supply, even if it is a happy little accident? So do you think we're about to stumble across many 3080s and 3070s, and I'd say 3090s as well?
Oh, who knows? There's probably conspiracy theories floating around about holding back supply and all that sort of thing. So I don't know whether this will happen. Who knows? Will they suffer blowback? I think people are very quick to forget. So I think will they suffer blowback? Probably not. I think people will just be happy that they can now buy the cards. They'll be like, oh, great, Nvidia's got the cards out. Good, now I can buy them. I think people will forget if they're playing games or whatever the situation is. But at the same time, the longer it takes for them to suddenly find this supply, the more damage they're doing. More damage they're hurting their brand and their credibility, and the less likely people will be to believe stock levels, in the future. So, yeah, I think that's kind of the situation with this one. Will they find more? I don't know. Potentially.
Time will tell.
I'd expect that at some point supply is going to be better than it is now.
I'm not even sort of, you were saying the conspiracy theory stuff. I'm entertaining all theories because I've heard a lot of stories from credible sources, and some of it aligns with some of the conspiracy theories that we're sort of hearing, which we'll have to wait and see. We don't have enough evidence. We will, as time goes on, the evidence will gather, and we'll have a better idea possibly of what's happened here. But yes, if they all of a sudden just have a good supply of them, then that will be a bit dodgy. But as Tim said, I think people will just be happy that they can finally buy one. They forget, move on, and then it becomes all the craziness will go to the next product launch, basically, and we'll do it all over again.
Yeah, people move on with this sort of thing, and Nvidia's brand power is such that I think they can absorb a lot of these hits fairly well
definitely.
And just continue rolling on.
Okay, next question here has some crappy product names in it, so I reckon this is a Tim-related one. Hi, do you recommend spending $150 to $200 more on a high-end 144Hz 1440p display like the LG 27GL850 instead of an entry-level 144Hz 1440p display like the Acer Nitro VG271U? How much of a difference can I really feel? I don't play FPS games. Go, Tim.
Oh, it's impressive of you to nail that question on the first try. We definitely didn't have to record multiple takes of that or anything. So
I know what you're talking about. I know what the LG 27GL850 is, Tim.
So it really depends on what sort of person you are. Like if you're more of a budget gamer and you don't have a ton of money to spend, then I'd probably say it's better to spend your $150 to $200 on, say, like a better GPU or something like that to get higher frame rates. But if you're talking about, let's say you have enough money and you just want like a good value product, I think that the 27GL850 and those products do give you a better experience. You're going to get, while the refresh rate is the same, you do get a clearer experience. It's a faster panel, so you'll see things like less ghosting and less smearing on the display. So when you see motion, you won't get those dark trails behind images. You won't see really bright inverse ghosting because it tends to be pretty well optimized and fast. So from that sense, even if you're playing at those lower refresh rates, you're going to get a benefit there and a better experience overall. But what these higher end panels also do is that, as I've talked about many times in my reviews, is that you can, generally speaking, set one overdrive setting and that will be good for the entire refresh range. So you get that really nice, clear experience, and you won't have to think, oh, am I playing at 60 Hz or 144Hz? It's just, you set it, you forget it, it gives you that good experience all of the time. Whereas when you buy these more entry-level monitors, I haven't tested the VG271U, but if we're talking like the ViewSonic one that I've recommended that's really popular, Pixio monitors, there's a few ASUS monitors as well in that price range. Generally speaking, you have to choose whether you're playing right at the high end. There's one mode that's best for that, sort of refresh rate. And then there's another mode that's more optimal for, say, 60 Hz. So you might have to play around and change those settings depending on the games that you're playing. So I think that both those things combined, just getting better performance all the time and then it being good performance in all situations, makes those high-end panels worth it if you have the money to spend. And you generally get other features too, like your better designs and better color performance and calibration. All those things come along with it. But if you're talking purely from gaming, I think a lot of the time it is worth spending that money. Is it worth spending $1,500 on a 4K monitor? Maybe not. But with this sort of price range, I do think there are benefits to those high-end panels. Well, I guess that pretty much wraps it up for part 2 of our usual Q&A series. Like we said at the start of this video, there will be a part 3 coming up, which will answer all of our Patreon questions. Well, not all of them. Some of them were pretty rubbish, so just the good ones. No, they're all great. The Patreon members are great. They ask great questions. We just can't fit all of them in. So we'll be getting to that soon. And you'll see that on the channel a bit later on. What else is there to say? You can become a Patreon member if you want to enjoy me destroying you guys in the videos on the main channel. I'm sure you guys love that when that happens. So,
yeah, make sure you subscribe.
Yeah, it's a really compelling pitch this time around, isn't it? What else? Yeah, 20% club usually at this point.
Yeah, thankfully 80% of the people that you've probably offended aren't here. So.
Yeah, that's good. They've all switched away from my horrible insults, so they'll be fine to watch part 3 without hearing anything about this. So that's great.
Yes.
What else? Fun
There's
times.
not much more to say apart from thank you very much for watching yet another Q&A video from us.
Yeah, we make a lot of these.
I'm your host, Steve.
Yep, I'm your host, Tim. See you
See you next time.
in the next one.